So hi, welcome again to Seekers and Cynics. This week I want to ask the question, or try and answer the question, so what happens when we die? What happens after we die? I want to be careful not to get into too minute detail here, because at the detail level, even among Christians, there are a variety of views. So what I want to try and do is just answer with some very broad brush strokes, and in the very broadest terms give the central Christian view, the core Christian view, the core Bible teaching on what happens when we die. I think the first thing that needs to be said, that may of course be obvious, but let's say it, is that Christianity differs first of all from atheism in that it teaches that there is an afterlife. There is something beyond death. Of course, for the materialist, for the atheist, the body is everything. There is no soul, there is no spirit. And so when the body dies, that is the end of all identity, of all conscious experience. Life ends, no more me, game over, that's it. Now, I understand that view. It's a very simple, tidy view. It's easy to understand. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that it is true. And of course, the thing is, there is no scientific way to determine this one way or the other. These questions of soul and spirit and life after death, they are beyond the investigation reach of the scientific method. The person who says, well, there is no soul, there is no spirit, there is no afterlife because science has not found those things, is like the trawlerman, the fisherman who trawls with a net made of 10-inch squares, who then comes home and declares that there are no fish in the ocean shorter than 10 inches long. Science is a wonderful net and it catches a great many things, but there are some things that it can never catch and investigate, and we should not, on that basis, rule out their existence. So Christianity declares that yes, there is an afterlife, there is a conscious, rational experience for the individual beyond death. The second distinction that I want to make is between Christian teaching and the Eastern idea of reincarnation. So reincarnation is the idea that we come back round in cycles, in multiple lives. We come back as another person, or possibly even as a lower animal, perhaps. But we have multiple entries and exits through this world over time. Now, there isn't time here to look in detail or critique the idea of reincarnation, but what I must very clearly say is that it is not a Christian view. It is not a view that is taught in the Bible. Okay? The Bible explicitly teaches that we each live once, die once, and after that there is judgment, and we'll come back to that in a moment. So there is no room within Christianity for reincarnation. If reincarnation were in some way to be found to be true, then the entirety of Christianity is necessarily false. And if Christian teaching is true, then reincarnation must be false. The two ideas are incompatible and they are mutually exclusive. It's my job here to tell you what the Bible teaches as clearly as I can. You must of course decide for yourselves whether or not that is true. But the idea of reincarnation is completely incompatible with anything that is in the Bible. So what we've said is that Christianity teaches that there is an afterlife. There is a conscious, rational afterlife. Let's think a little bit more about what that involves and what is the nature of that afterlife. What is very clear in the Bible, right through, and particularly in many of the teachings and parables of Jesus, is that after death there is judgment. Standing before God, who holds the record of our actions, our words, our deeds, our failure to do things, standing before God to give an account, to be judged. And Jesus told a great many stories. Many of his parables were about this moment of judgment and crisis, and are we ready for that? And he's trying to warn his listeners to live a life that is ready for and prepared for a day of judgment. Rather than to live a life, as many do, that just says, well, it won't happen. It's not going to happen. Instead, we should live in the consciousness that that day is coming and that we will face the living God and have to give an account for our lives. So very core Christian teaching is that after death, we will stand before God in judgment. The teachings of Jesus then very often use a metaphor of a great feast beyond this life and beyond this world. But it's a feast at which not all people are present. Some are excluded. And Jesus has a number of times and parables where he tells this similar, paints this similar picture. And the excluded ones, he says, will find themselves in outer darkness, Jesus' phrase, where he says there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. He's telling us that there is a state beyond death, a possible state beyond death of anguish, of regret, of bitter tears and sadness. And that will be the case if we have not in this life turned to God and lived openly with God, and if we've refused to repent, if we've just lived for ourselves as number one. His central point in this metaphor, well, this double metaphor of this great feast on the one hand and outer darkness on the other, is that what we do in this life matters. It really matters, and that it will carry spiritual consequences into eternity. Elsewhere, the Bible teaches of heaven and hell, not places that can be literally described, but a condition in which we receive the natural and appropriate consequences of our choices and actions in this world. The Bible's quite clear that all are invited to heaven, that God's desire is that all should be there. And so if we find ourselves in outer darkness with tears and regret, it will only be because we have in effect excluded ourselves from the great feast by refusing to allow God any place in our lives, by refusing his invitation. The feast has an invitation, and we must choose whether we accept it or not. If we insist in this world on living separately from his love and his grace, then in effect there is no other option but for the same to be true in the next world. C.S. Lewis put it this way. He said, in the end there are only two sorts of people. There are those who say to God, your will be done. Not lined in the Lord's Prayer, your will be done. And there are those who leave God no choice but to say to them, your will be done. In other words, if we separate ourselves and live separately from God in this world, then what we've chosen in this world becomes reality in the next. Therefore, we must take great care with our attitude to God and with how we live our lives. See you next time.